This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Bruchim Habayim, welcome everyone to a special edition of All Parsha on Parshas Bamidbar, the Ben La'ashri on Parshas Bamidbar, the Tzaddik of Ra'anana, Rabbi Yitzchak HaKohen Huberman. We've been teaching from the Ben La'ashri on the Parsha, and this week the OU has launched their new site and new app, the All Parsha app and site, and this will be the last week that this year is available on all venues. From now on, it will be exclusively available on the OU site and app. Well, Rabbi Yitzchak HaKohen Huberman gives a haftacha that anyone who says over his divrei Torah, he will pray for them. Ba'olam hazeh u'ba'olam haba. But anytime we learn Torah, that itself is the ultimate segula, as the Torah encompasses all the brachos in the world. So the Ben La'ashri, Parshas Bamidbar, would like to share with you the Ezras Hashem 9 offerings of the Ben La'ashri on Parshas Bamidbar. First, he records a divrei hisoros that he gave over for the Mifal HaYeshivos in connection with this week's Parsha. We know it is our custom that every year we read Parshas Bechukaisai and Bamidbar before Kabbalas HaTorah. What exactly is the specific connection between Bechukaisai and Bamidbar in preparation for Kabbalas HaTorah? Rashi famously says at the beginning of Bechukaisai Telechu Shetiu Amelim B'Torah, that we should be engrossed and toil in Torah, and if so, Hashem will give us what we need. And the question is, really, is everything dependent on Amelos B'Torah? All the 49 klalos in the Teichacha will come if we're not Amel B'Torah, and if we are, we'll be saved. But what will Jews say who they don't have such fine faculties of intelligence and their minds cannot process the very delicate and detailed logics and arguments of the Torah? What about somebody who maybe was an orphan and he didn't have someone to teach him, or someone who was born at a time of war, or someone who was born in a time of difficulty, or, says the Tzaddik Ra'anana, somebody in Eretz Yisrael today where it's so difficult to make a parnasa, some people have to wake up very early in the morning, they could barely catch a minyan, and they're out all day in the sun. What will these people do? Do they really have the capabilities to be toiling on a regular basis in Torah? So Yibam Shalom says, if you can't fulfill Parshas Bechukaisai, namely being Amel B'Torah, there is one more Eitzah, and that is Parshas Bamidbar, the count of the Bnei Yisrael. After all, we know that Bnei Yisrael were not counted by number, but rather they were counted by shekel. So the Eitzah is, if you can't actually be Amel B'Torah, you could support the Torah. And when you support the Torah, then all of your work during the day will be considered Amelos B'Torah, because you're being Amel so that others can be Amel B'Torah. So if you can't do it the method of Parshas Bechukaisai, you still have a way to be Mekabel the Torah through the method of Parshas Bamidbar. Okay, we now move on to a drush, Su'u'es Rosh B'nai Yisrael. Says the Tzaddik Ra'anana, according to the Beis Yisrael, the Ger Rebbe, in the name of Tzaddikim, that why is Hashem counting Klal Yisrael? Well, there's a rule based on the Gemara in Be'ah on Daf Gimel that teaches us that Kol Davar Shebeminyan Ein Batal Olam. Anything which is counted has a certain chashivas, can never become batal. Therefore, we too, since Hashem counts us, we are chashuv, and we will never, ever become batal. This is analogous, says the Tzaddik Ra'anana, to that which it says in Yushalmi, if you have a small key that you're afraid might get lost, what do? You put a keychain on it, you put a big chain on it. So too Hashem put His name on Klal Yisrael. And the Ben La'ashri says that this is relevant to the idea that he advances that the 4 first books of the Torah correspond to the 4 names of Hashem's Yud Kei Vav Kei. The Yud represents Chachma, that's Bereshis, B'Chachma Sabara Elokim. The Hey represents Chumash Shemais. The Vav is Vayikra, and the final Hey, which is Malchus, and Ein Melech B'Layam is the beginning of Bamidbar. So now that we have all 4 letters of Hashem's name and we're associated with His name, now that we're counted, we can never be lost. Kol Davar Shebeminyan Einoi Batel La'olam. We move on to the third offering, Su'u'es Roish, Vayisyaldu al mishpachoisam leveis avoisam. There's a very well-known medrash in the Yalkut Shimoni that what is the connection between Eila HaMitzvos at the end of Vayikra and the yichus of Klal Yisrael Vayisyaldu al mishpachoisam leveis avoisam. Harbe kolmasim nishtabrim al zeh. Harbe diyoy nishbachu al zeh. Many pens have broke trying to explain this medrash. Much ink has spilled trying to explain this medrash. But what is the connection between Kabbalas HaTorah and the pure lineage of the Jewish people? But at this point, says Itzhak Ranan, even though I've wrote about this in the past, I want to focus on one word of the medrash that says, Amru umay sa'olam ma ra'u elu lehiskarev, which almost implies that the medrash says, the nations of the world ask God, why do you choose the Jewish people? And Hashem says, Haviu shtar yuchseim, show me your lineage. You don't have pure lineage. The Jewish people have pure lineage, that's why I've selected them. However, says the Ben Lashi, if you look carefully, it doesn't say that the nations of the world ask God why you selected them, but rather, why aren't the Jewish people afraid of coming close to you? Lehiskarev, why are they coming close? They're not afraid. Says the Ben Lashi, there's a famous question of the Marsha. And many of them have Parshas asked this question. Why is it by the Ben Sairu Moira, the wayward son, who is overindulgent, and his punishment is we kill him, al shem soifai, based on the way he'll turn out. But we know that when it comes to Yishmael, even though he was destined to harm the Jewish people, Hashem said, Kishama kol hanar ba'asher hu shama, I'm going to judge him the way he is right then, we're not going to look into his future. Why by Yishmael did the Rebbe Shalom judge him the way he was then, and by the Ben Saramara we look into his future? Well, says the Ben Lashri, based on the Marsha. The Marsha explains that Yishmael came from a Tipa Kshera. He was of holy origins. He came from Abraham and Yishmael. Therefore, since he came from holy origins, so then he is not predisposed to have a bad ending, and Hashem says, I'm not going to look about what he'll be like in the end. Masha'in Kain. When it comes to the Ben Saru Moira, who he is the product of the union of someone who lived with a Yifas Tayar, so he has bad origins, so we have to worry about what will be in his end. So Hashem says, you know why the Jewish people are not concerned that they won't be able to Mekayim the Torah? You know why they're not worried that they're going to violate an infraction, they're going to be Chayav Misa? It's because of their very pure lineage of Vayisyaldu al Mishpachoisam. Offering number 4. The Ben Lashi has a very interesting diak, that in the names of 3 of the Shvatim, we find Hashem's name Shakai. LeRuvein Elitzur ben Shideur, Shideur has the name Shakai. LeShimon Shlumiel ben Suri Shaddai, Suri Shaddai has the name Shakai. LeHidan Achiezer ben Ami Shaddai, there too the name Shakai appears. Why? Says the Ben Lashri, based on the Arizal and Likutei Torah Parshas Eiv, a Sefer Eiv, that Shakai is relevant to the Midah of Yisoid, the Midah of the Bris. We find by these 3 Shvatim a Pagam in the Bris. By Ruvain, it says Vayishkav as Bilah, he violated Bilah, even though the Gemara says anyone who says Ruvain sinned is making a mistake. Nevertheless, that's what it says. And therefore his Nasi, his Elitzur, was a partner in the Machloikis of Korach. He caused Machloikis. Machloikis is also a Pagam of Bris, like it says in Tehillim Nun Hey, Shalach Yadai B'Shloimav Chilel Brisai. When you violate Shalom, it's a defilement of the Bris. By Shevet Shimon, of course, we have the Avera of Zimri, which was a Chet of Pagam HaBris. And by Dan, we have Shimshon. And therefore, these 3 Shvatim had the Pagam of Bris, and they were all punished in this world. Elitzur was burnt. Zimri was pierced by a sword. Shimshon was stoned. And certainly their Misa was Mechaper. And therefore it says Shakai. Shakai is relevant to Yisoid of the Bris Milah. So Elitzur was a Shutuf in the Machloikes of Kairach, with Moshe Rabbeinu, and it says Shakai by these 3 Shvatim because they all had a certain lacking in the inyan of Yesod. We move on to the fifth offering. By Shimon, the Mefarshim observe, he's the only Shevet where it says Pikudav and Legulgalaisam. Says the Ben La'ashri, there's a reason for this. Pikudav is a lashon of pakad, missing. There was missing something from Shevet Shimon, and that is because of the episode of Zimri ben Salu, 24,000 Jews fell, and therefore there was Ichisaron. Furthermore, Legol Galoisam, this is a remez to the 24,000 students of Shimon, the 24,000 members of Shevet Shimon, who were reincarnated as the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, who died during Sfira. So in the Shevet Shimon, there were those who were missing, and there was an inyan of Gilgal, that the members of Shevet Shimon were nisgalgal as the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. Now we're going to discuss a very interesting subject, and that is why Shevet Levi was the smallest of all the Shvatim. The Ramban asks, and the Mefarshim ask, it's in Bamidbar Rabbah, Parsha Gimel Isir Aleph, why was Levi the smallest of all the Shvatim? And the Medrash says, because they carried the Aron, and the Aron was such a holy item, it caused them to lose members of their Shevet. And the Ramban asks, they didn't start carrying the Aron yet. Why were they already the smallest? Says the Ben Lashri, it could be, based on the Arizal and the Shara Kavanos, that Golus Mitzrayim was in order to be Mesakein, the Neshamas of the earlier generations, the Dar HaMabel, the Dar HaFlaga, the Anshe Sedoim, they're all Nisgalgel Mitzrayim. But they can only be Nisgalgel if there is some shemetz of impropriety in the zivug of husband and wife. But because Bnei Levi were such kedoshim, and their zivugam were with great kedusha, so therefore the neshamas of these Rishaim were not kedai to enter the family of Levi. The Ben Lashri, in a further piece, he also quotes the Chida, who asked Ramban's question, why Shevet Levi was the smallest of all the Shvatim, and he says Archaim dismisses the Chida's answer, Chida dismisses Archaim's answer, and says Ben Lashri, in his personal opinion, similar to what he just said, that the reason why we went to Mitzrayim is to rectify the neshamais of the Dar HaMabel and the Dar HaFlag and the Anshe Sedoim, and that was rectified b'choimer uvolveinu v'avodas perach. However, Bnei Levi, they were not involved in physical shibud, but rather kal v'choimer and libon halacha choimer uvolveinum. The Zohar says they're involved in learning, therefore they were not given old neshamas to be masakin, they were given new neshamas, and there are very few new neshamas, and therefore that's why there's so few members of Shevet Levi. Okay, another offering. Another pshat of why Klal Yisrael were more numerous than Shevet Levi. It's because the nations of the world said to Klal Yisrael, if the Mitzrayim dominated your bodies, certainly they dominated your wives, and they were mazana with your wives, so Hashem made a miracle that the Klal Yisrael proliferated, that b'chashar ya'anu oisai, Kain Yirba v'chein Yifrais, and we have a tradition, God doesn't make a miracle for nothing, so if Hashem made a miracle, it was to demonstrate that in fact, the Mitzrayim did not dominate our wives. However, this is all based on the taina of the Mitzrayim. If they dominated our bodies by subjugating us, certainly they dominated our wives. But Shevet Levi, they didn't subjugate. So they didn't have a taina that they dominated the wives of Levi. But Mela Hashem didn't have to make the miracle that Shevet Levi should proliferate and increase. And finally, the ninth and final offering, in Parak Daled Pasuk Tezayin, the Pasuk says, the appointment of Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen was he carried the Shem and Hamar and other items, and the Ramban asks, nah, come on, Elazar did not carry all of that. It means he was appointed over the carriers. However, if you look in the Yishalmi in Shabbos Parak Yud Halacha Gimel, Rashi quotes it, Elazar himself carried everything. So the Ramban says, how did Elazar himself carry everything? He was a Gibar, like Yaakov and like Moshe. Says the Ben Lashri, okay, but still, you need great siyata d'shmaya. That's why his name was Elazar, Kel Ezer, that he didn't do it with his own power, he only did it be'ezer HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, we hope, as the Yom Tov of Shavuos approaches us, Haba Aleinu L'Toiva, we should be zoicha to the Ezer Shamayim, to elevate us, to lift us up, and to give us siyata d'shmaya, to learn His holy Torah, lilmoid ulalamed, lishmar v'lasais. Thank you everyone for joining. Agun Shabbos, Agun Yom Tiv, Chag Kosher v'Sameach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.